Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. This will provide an overview of cybersecurity and best practices to protect your organization from an attack. Today's program will be presented by Scott Mahoney, Senior Manager of Withum System and Organizational Control Services Group, and Andrea Valencia, Senior Consultant of Withum Cyber and Information Technology Services Group. Before we begin, I have a few notes. Today's materials can be found in the toolbar on the right of your screen. Also, at the bottom of the toolbar, you will see a chat box. Feel free to send us your questions during the presentation. We will do our best to address them at the end. There will be 4 polling questions throughout the program. To qualify for CPE credit, you must participate in each poll. CPE certificates will be emailed to you within a few weeks. And finally, once the webinar is over, there will be a pop-up asking you to complete a survey of today's webinar. Please take a moment to complete it. It is our best way of being able to provide you with the best and most relevant programs possible. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott and Andrea.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Hopefully we can help fill your early afternoon or morning with some insight as far as some cybersecurity topics that are key, especially with the impact of the recent pandemic that we have going on. So hopefully you're looking forward to this. I'm definitely looking forward to providing you as much insight as we can give, and we're definitely looking forward to the questions at the end. So as a quick introduction to myself, my name is Scott Mahoney. I am a senior manager at Withum. I've been with Withum now for just about 3 years. I've been doing cybersecurity related work, risk management, information security, internal control assessments for over 20 years now. So I'm definitely well versed in understanding the different types of risks, what could be done to manage those risks. And I'm joined by my colleague, Andrea Valencia. Andrea, if you want to quickly introduce yourself.
Sure, Scott, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. So a bit about myself. I'm an IT security and forensic specialist here with Withum Cyber. A little bit about my background. I received my master's from NYU on international relations and transnational security, where I have devoted most of my time in studying international relations theory and cyber warfare from a nation state perspective. I have vast experience in dealing with IT and IT security, handling several complex environments, as well as incident response, PII data or personal identifiable information, PHI data or personal healthcare information, trade secrets, and more. And lastly, I have also participated in some of the largest data breaches with our head of cyber, such as Sony network intrusions, Target data breach, and Banner Health, among others.
Great, thank you, Andrea. So one thing just regarding the SOC group, we do deal with internal controls. We work very closely and hand in hand with the cybersecurity group because mainly it's being able to understand the risk to organizations and what could go wrong and how to manage those risks. So we assist organizations with being able to do such things. If we can move on to the next slide. So just as a quick disclaimer, Withum Cyber, the contents in this deck, they may contain basic and preliminary observations. We'll also refer to some generally accepted principles for forensic investigation. So a big piece of what cyber does is forensic investigation. So we support clients as they go through the understanding of specifically what a hacker may have done within their environment or means to circumvent certain scenarios and mitigate the risk of potential intrusions. So any observations are subject to further investigation and explanation of facts, and therefore subject to change. Additional evidence and forensic analysis may be required to support findings and observations. So as far as what we're looking to achieve today, there's a number of objectives that we have. One, we'll give you a short overview of what Withum Cyber is. So ultimately, what we're looking to do is teach you means of how to mitigate and manage information security. And especially now with COVID and the ways business operate completely changing for some organizations, try to understand what some of those changes are. So with that, understanding the threat landscape, so COVID-19, what has actually changed? How has business been impacted as a result of COVID-19? Similarly, identify how organizations have been impacted. So we'll go over some very interesting and intriguing statistics on what has actually occurred over the last 3 or 4 months and how that has impacted various organizations. And we're going to, with that, get into specifically impact from a healthcare perspective. So healthcare has been a heavy target over the recent months because of the susceptibility and the concentration toward working on COVID-19 and developing vaccines from a pharmaceutical perspective. So there's been a heavy target that is placed on healthcare. We're going to describe ways to combat cybersecurity at the organizational level and keep information safe and secure. Lastly, we're going to identify ways in which you can defend yourself and your organization from social engineering attacks. So one of the big impacts nowadays is social engineering attacks because people are working from home, and also they have other things on their mind. So we'll go through those various elements on how you can protect yourself as well as your organization from such attacks. So now, Andrea, if you want to go into a little bit more information about the cyber team.
Sure, thanks, Scott. So, besides myself, we have some very, very top-notch expertise here within the group, which I think is what really makes us unique and allows us to provide many of our clients with unique processes and technologies. We have people ranging from SETCOM or the United States Central Command all the way to the US Navy, Air Force, as well as US Secret Service. Our head of cyber, Matthew Ferrante, former US Secret Service agent, for example, has been the technical expert in criminal, civil, regulatory, and class action lawsuits. He apprehended over 65 plus hackers globally and was recognized as one of the top digital forensic experts while in the Secret Service. Now moving on to the next slide. So here at Withum Cyber, we have a wide range of services and expertise, as I discussed. We, for example, incorporate IT security into our managed services, as we believe that IT and security should go hand in hand and not be a separate add-on. And I mention this because a lot of the time when we go into environments to assess it, a lot of businesses or organizations are disconnected from what the quote-unquote IT guy is doing, or there is a trust factor at hand. We have a saying here, trust but verify. I cannot stress enough the importance of ensuring that your virtual environment, meaning your firewalls, your routers, their configurations, all these different access points or roads into your environment are properly secured, configured, and tested. Time and time again, we see during the assessments that firewalls are not properly configured to block or narrow down points of entry. And when an impact occurs, insurers look to see whether or not you are maintaining your environment properly after they send their own firm to assess. In regards to insurers overall, and for those who may have had experience with them, the insurers is always looking to see whether or not your environment was compliant, and from there see whether or not they will pay out claims. The insurers, at the end of the day, they're out to make sure that the impact on their side is minimized, and having worked from different sides of the spectrum, such as class action lawsuits, regulatory, etc., is where you really start to see that the insurer is protecting themselves and not your organization. Therefore, dotting your I's, crossing your T's is important. You may think, well, how do I do that? How do I ensure that my business is safe from a technological standpoint? And that is accomplished by testing your environment regularly, meaning doing end-to-end assessments that look at your environment with a different set of eyes, such as how is their data being protected? Are the policies and procedures in place compliant with data privacy laws? How is the organization overall dealing with GDPR, New Year's Shield, and other types of regulatory bodies internally? Do they have a DPO or a data privacy officer, or how are incidents handled internally? For example, is the personnel trained in forensics and the preservation of data? All of these type of things are just the tip of the iceberg when we do assessment and when we provide feedback to organizations. I mentioned briefly forensics, and a lot may think that digital forensics or e-discovery is just expensive, and that is not necessarily true. Yes, it may get expensive when you get into analyzing terabytes of data related to a breach, but when it comes to identifying, preserving, or using forensic techniques to do triage, it may save your organization from paying out millions of dollars if an incident is mishandled. So on the next slide, as cyber defense experts, we're increasingly dealing with more and more complex landscapes, systems, centralized and decentralized environments, and more importantly, ever involving high volumes of data. To the right, you will see a list of various cases types that we have supported, such as espionage, terrorism, hacking, and more. And when a criminal, civil, regulatory, or fact-finding matter is involved, and this is important for you to remember, somewhere a computer device contains pertinent evidence. A lot of the times when you're dealing with the feds, they want everything on a pretty bow and then hand it off to them. And there are instances where businesses or organizations, they want to hand it off to law enforcement. And sometimes you may not want to do that because, in short, organizations or businesses are in to make a profit, while the criminal justice system is there to make an arrest and putting cuffs on people. And the government, unfortunately, is very slow in their investigation. So the best suggestion when debating on whether or not to hand it off to law enforcement, always consult with your lawyer and your cybersecurity experts. The combination of both will always provide you with a clearer path on the do's and don'ts. At the bottom, you will see an intercept of a $4.2 million stolen banker check, for example, that we did from a Russian organized crime. That was a very cool case. Just to touch again, the type of devices that we're getting are more and more sophisticated. You will see the watch held up, for example. In the back of it was a USB device that was utilized to extract financial data. We're dealing with stuff down to a chip level with all different devices, and especially with the onset of IoT or the Internet of Things, it's getting more and more increasingly complex. So in short, it's not just about the hard drives in the computers. The amount of data you can fit into a micro SD card is astronomical, and it is important for organizations to have the appropriate security controls in place to ensure that data, specifically PHI data, is not leaving your environment. So on the next slide, I talked a little bit about forensics before and the level of sophistication that we're going to. The bottom pictures are sample pictures of what the chip of a phone looks like. That tiny square piece holds all of your data, all of your information. It includes GPS locations, whether or not you turned off or on your device, browsing history, the times, the different Wi-Fi networks that you have connected to, all your messages, pictures, multimedia messages. In some instances, we can even retrieve emails, depending on the type of device, the type of software that it has installed. And I mentioned this because this particular case, it involved a death in a car accident where we were initially brought in to do standard forensics, meaning identify, collect, and preserve the phone. And some of you may ask, well, how do you preserve the phone? Well, you do that by creating a forensic image, or that's what we call a forensic image, a bit-by-bit image of your phone, as well as preserving the physical state of the device. However, when we received it, if you look at the bottom left, the phone, as you can see, was completely inoperable due to the car crash. However, the data in the chip was intact. So I bring this up because in a lot of cases, including those handled internally, people may say, for example, oh, the USB device appears wiped. There is no data, therefore there is nothing that can be done. And this is not true. Forensics allows to recover data that was previously deleted and parse it out or put it together in a readable format. And this is extremely important to remember in the healthcare industry because your employees handle a lot of PII, PHI data that can be sold in the dark web. And usually what we find during these types of healthcare related data breaches is that information had been leaking for a long time, or individuals were connecting USB devices that acted as keyloggers, sending data remotely. As such, having an in-house CFI or a cyber forensic investigation capability can help your organization identify and preserve these devices. And while doing triage, help your internal security team, your CIO, your CISO, etc., to detect whether or not other points of compromise exist. Now, something to remember from this slide is GIGO, meaning garbage in, garbage out. You do not want to be in a position where the incident was mishandled internally and now bringing in outside consultants and the like results in a more costly investigation. We highly suggest to hospitals and those organizations that are dealing with HIPAA that they look into establish an internal security and CFI capability. You will definitely see your return on investment when your people are trained appropriately and they can handle more complex incidents, thus reducing the amount of third-party vendors that are needed to be brought in to validate the results. Now, understanding the threat landscape. So moving on to this slide, motivation of threat actors. A lot of you may think the cyber criminals are only after money, but think again. On this module, you will see that money is not the only thing that cyber criminals are after. It is important to understand that cyber threats and attacks are not always financially motivated. And there are a lot of different reasons why cyber attacks occur. Industrial espionage is definitely one of them. For example, I think this case I'm about to mention used to be classified, but Air France used to have all of the first-class cabins wired to capture C-class level executive conversations as they were doing overseas trips. And there is even an admission by some of the stakeholders within the government that there was nothing wrong with that, and even to assist and help in their industry. So 3 things: confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your system is what criminals target to bring organizations to their knees. Cyber criminals can launch attacks to obfuscate someone's trails. For example, they may infiltrate one system in order to hop into other system and hide their identity and clean up their trails. Moving on to the next slide and continuing as to why is there a high risk of cyber intrusions? We have some big indicators such as complacency, weak security, no strategy. They lack a CISO or a Chief Information Security Officer. If your organization does not have a CISO, consider getting one for checks and balances on the environment. This is very important. There is also very limited IT security expertise. Security in terms of IT is a little bit foreign within organizations, and that is mainly because they handle a lot. IT started with just handling workstations and servers and then moved on into telephone networks. Then they got involved in credit card data, cloud environments, and so on. So they handle a lot, and security needs to be handled by security experts. And again, for check and balances on the environment, it's absolutely critical. Lack of or no accountability, very important. A lot of people don't like that type of language, but there has to be an accountable exec, as there needs to be accountability for the security of the environment. If there is no accountability present in your environment, I will tell you right now that accountability is coming. On the following slide, accountability for C-suites. So people are trying to put forth the Corporate Executive Accountability Act, which will impose jail time on corporate executives. We have worked cases in which the CEO was let go, such as a Target data breach. The industry, in terms of protecting confidential data, is getting out of hand. This is why we see the emergence of regulatory bodies such as GDPR, CCPA, and other types of laws, as well as each country coming out with their own level of data protection regulations. as they want to see a higher level of accountability internally. Remember something, just because a business or an organization is domestic here, it does not mean that you or the organization is not held accountable to these laws. And the reason is because you may have data that impacts someone overseas and their laws may be applicable to you. Now, entering the mindset of a threat actor. So it is important that you guys understand and know your threat actors. Those threats include both external and internal threats. To the left, you have Eastern European organized crime, which are highly engaged in cyber crimes, and there are often gray lines between them and state-sponsored actors. We have people who hack for social reasons, or hacktivists. So it's not always financially motivated. A hacktivist, for those who are not familiar with that term, is a person or individual who is using hacking to bring about political or social change. Consider that hacktivism or groups that practice that are hacking for various causes and will target your organizations to make a statement. So it is important to know that money is not always a motivator. You also have nation-state actors who will also target SMEs or small business enterprises, as they're easy targets, utilized to harvest trade secrets and confidential information, and they also hop into wider, bigger trusted infrastructures. You also have internal threats, which, for example, you have the individual on the right hand with a tie, which didn't like his year-end bonus and created a logic bomb. And I will discuss a little later what that means. Either way, the bottom line is you need to know who is in your environment. And I'm not a lawyer, and neither is anybody here with them cyber. But for the stuff that we have worked on, we have worked on the civil side, the criminal side, the regulatory side, and class action lawsuits. So we have worked on all the sides of the fence, including with the insureds. And what we're beginning to hear more is the words negligent, recklessness, intent. So for businesses out there, organizations, be mindful that if your environment is negligent, recklessness, there is potential for liability. So I talked a little bit about the individual on the left. And his name, for those of you who don't know, is Roger Duronio. And here is an example of an internal threat coming from an IT administrator. Roger was getting paid, this is a little background on him. Roger was getting paid about $125,000 a year, and he didn't like his $25,000 year-end bonus. So what he did was write what is called a logic bomb. And if you look in the middle, that's actually a piece of the logic bomb, the code that we had extracted. So what the logic bomb does is that when specific factors occur, the logic bomb is triggered, or the code will execute and basically cause a catastrophic impact and actually cause a catastrophic impact on the company's financial system. However, this guy, he didn't just stop there. What he did is that he put puts against the company portfolio to basically profit off of the impacts that the logic bomb caused. So the logic bomb went off. He actually made money out of the puts he had invested, and basically thousands of systems went down. And this is not an isolated incident, and it's something that we see happening more and more often. We have worked many IT misconduct matters, including IT staff holding institutions hostage. It is important that businesses remember that IT administrators have a lot of control, and it is important that businesses have appropriate checks and balances in place for the availability and the sustainability of the organization. So I talked a little bit about USBs before. With COVID-19, before, what we used to see was that hackers will go to parking lots or to offices, and they will drop off USB devices on the floor. People will pick them up. But what people didn't realize is they had separate partitions, meaning the driver role was partitioned in a way that code was written on the second part, and that usually will have keyloggers and send out any type of passwords, email addresses, or were configured to actually just extract the data for somebody to just leave. At any moment. And a lot of the times what we notice is that for hospitals and the like, they're not employing what's called like data loss prevention, meaning you can block your ports. Blocking your ports is extremely important. If your people need devices to connect to, well, there are ways that you can do so safely. For example, each device, believe it or not, it has a unique ID. If you can actually whitelist the unique ID, you can actually just say, hey, this type of information only goes to this device. You can configure in many ways at different levels. Okay, dawn of kinetic cyber. What is kinetic cyber attacks? It's basically the ability to cause direct or indirect physical damage. Connecting physical objects and processes to the cyber world has offered us capabilities that exponentially exceeded the expectations, but the risks are increasing as well. Cyberkinetic attacks is definitely where we're heading to. They have so far been validated experimentally in labs. They have been used operationally in espionage and sabotage, used criminally in attacks throughout the world, and many more. Now, to the next slide. We have next generation IoT devices. So next generation cyber attacks and challenges. With the onset of IoT devices, like I mentioned earlier, Internet of Things, we are connecting everything to the internet, from pacemakers, insulin pumps, to cars, even airplanes, nuclear centrifuges. All of these devices are susceptible to cyber attacks, including vehicles. Vehicles are an example of code gone bad, where literally the AI didn't work to when it caused injury and death. On other instances, for example, manufacturers are starting to employ facial recognition capabilities into these vehicles and using them as sensors to detect heart rates and software that assesses a driver's state of awareness. So this type of technology, of course, brings a lot of attention as malicious actors and even governments who have access or gain access to the code will be able to monitor and do mass surveillance in civilian populations. So insulin pumps. About 40,000 of these were recently recalled when the manufacturers found out that individuals could gain access to them through remote administration and basically tamper with the amount of insulin being released into someone's body. As mentioned earlier, anything that you connect to the internet has a high risk of being hacked. It is important to remember that medical instruments have historically low levels of security and have already been linked to a range of vulnerabilities and security attacks. So let's talk about pacemakers. Is it possible to cause death? And the answer is yes, it is very possible. A lot of these pacemakers are remotely controlled, and anything, again, connected to the internet can be hacked. It is not a question of if it will happen, but a question of when it is going to occur. I have here on this slide, for example, Dick Cheney. In his case, his pacemaker was disabled remotely. And what we have learned from our head of cyber during his time in the service was that the amount of people researching different ways to tamper with these devices, including gaining remote access to them, is massive.
All right, so we're on to our first polling question. Do you feel that your organization currently has adequate resources, including personnel and monetary resources, to meet their information security needs? Yes, no, not sure, not applicable. All right, I'll give you about 20 more seconds.
Right now, it looks like 74% are coming in at yes. Couple more seconds here.
All right, I'm going to close it out. And here are the results.
So 75% said yes, they do believe that they have the adequate resources. No, say is at 6%, and not sure at 19%. Okay. Well, I will tell you that we'll go through some of the statistics actually in our next section here, and you may be surprised by some of the answers. So although 75% say they are prepared, we will see overall from the healthcare industry perspective how that looks. So next we're going to go into impacts by cybersecurity events. So really what we're going to get into here is the key statistics that are really driving cybersecurity over the last few months particularly. So there's going to be some stats that will be before the last couple months just to kind of drive in and we can get a full picture of the environment. But for the most part, we're concentrating here over the last 4 months and how the overall environment or cyber landscape has been impacted by COVID-19 and what it has done or what people have taken advantage of from that perspective. So when we take a breakdown of the cybersecurity crime, economy, and profits, there's a number of elements you can look at here. So illicit online markets, these are markets that their commercial website that operates via dark nets or dark web is another term that's used. This is black markets for selling or brokering transactions. This may include drugs, weapons, counterfeit money, and other illegal goods, but there's also some legal goods that are sold by that as well. So in total, that accounts for $860 billion. And then we move on to theft of intellectual property or trade secrets. This is a $500 billion market. So obviously it's quite lucrative. There's many examples. One good example is how American Semiconductors was actually creating some of the technology that would go into wind turbines, and they became ensnarled with China as one of their biggest clients, and during the process they actually had some code that was stolen, and as a result the company is barely in operation as of today. They've lost, and they actually sued for $1.2 billion, but knowing that it's in the Chinese legal system, nothing has really come to play there. So the US justice system has come in, tried to make things right, but ultimately led to a couple Chinese executives being fired, but hasn't really led to anything beyond that, unfortunately. Data trading. So this would be information that's stolen as part of a breach. It's a $160 billion business. So obviously it's quite lucrative and creates an opportunity for individuals who have the knowledge to go in and steal data and try to make money off it. And what I think one of the key distinctions here is, I know as Andrea was speaking, she was talking about it's not all about money. Well, in these scenarios, this is just talking about the money side of it. So when you add in the factor that all of these individuals are trying to have other motivations as far as performing cybercrime, that's key to note. So it's not just about the money factors. Cybercrime is a service, so some individuals are actually being paid just to perform cybercrime, whether it be for a nation state to perform damage, or whether it may be the organization itself is just trying to perform crime to make money in itself. But people are hired and paid to perform different actions. So it is a service that's out there. Last one is ransomware. Ransomware we'll definitely talk quite a bit about. It's a $1 billion business, and as you may or may not heard, ransomware is a big issue now. I can tell you one good example of ransomware that occurred was WannaCry back in 2017, and that actually took down the healthcare system in the United Kingdom. So what happened in that scenario is WannaCry came out. The hospitals and facilities that were impacted by this decided not to pay, or even if they they did pay, it took down their systems. So because they didn't have all the patient records, what they did is they just stopped performing any types of services. So the entire healthcare system in the United Kingdom was brought down for about a week back in July of 2017. Luckily, things have changed as far as WannaCry. Actually, a hacker himself came out and found the code to get rid of that and to ensure that it wasn't impacting the systems. Otherwise, that may still be in existence today. But of course, there's always other ransomware that comes about. So as we move on to the next slide. So now we're going to specifically get into COVID-19 related cyber statistics, and they're quite alarming. So cyber attacks, they've been up 400%. Google has been blocking over 18 million COVID-19 phishing emails and malware daily. So those are just the ones that don't make it through. Spear phishing attacks, which we'll talk about specifically what spear phishing is a little later, but ultimately they're phishing attacks that are targeted attacks. They've increased over 667%. The FBI Complaint Center has received over 3,600 COVID-19 related scams. There's also been an uptick on phone scams. Ransomware, which we talked about, that has increased over 148%. So, and the average amount demanded for ransomware attack has increased by 33%. So ultimately, one of the biggest factors here is because workers are remote and also individuals are focused on other things that are going on, whether it's trying to stay physically safe, homeschooling, or managing other mental challenges that are going on now. There's a lot of other things that are taking away their attention to really worry about security. So additionally, from a lot of individuals have been required to work remotely during this time. So a lot of organizations have a lack of technology to secure such a workforce. One of the things about the ransomware attacks and the increase is the average amount being demanded is up $84,000. So it probably isn't going to break the bank of most organizations. However, it is significant, and only about a third of those that are impacted by ransomware actually pay, which the FBI does suggest that organizations shouldn't pay ransomware because it does actually encourage cyber criminals to continue the activity because they're making money on it. However, there's been notable cases where maybe the organizations or the entities that were impacted should have just paid. Merck is one example, but two examples that we have from a government standpoint is in 2019, Baltimore, the city of Baltimore, they were requested to pay $76,000 for the encryption key to get rid of all the ransomware. However, they chose not to. It ended up costing them over $18 million to recover. Similarly, in 2018, the city of Atlanta was hit. They were asked to pay a $52,000 ransomware request, and they again chose not to pay, and it ended up costing them over $17 million to recover. So it's definitely a lucrative business for those who pay, and for those who choose not to pay, it takes a lot to recover. So it's something that is going to progressively get worse as we continue. So it's making sure that we have mechanisms to protect ourselves. So if we could move on to the next slide. So a couple more statistics here. 46% of businesses that started working remotely have experienced at least one form of cyber attack. So almost 1 out of 2 businesses that are now working remotely because of this have experienced an attack. Phishing websites have increased by 350%. One of the key elements here is that, or I guess a personal example is, as this had originally started, my wife had found a website or a Facebook post for Clorox. There was a Clorox LLC website for going and buying wipes. So we had looked into that, and obviously Clorox is not an LLC, so that immediately drew our attention, but it just shows the examples of how people are trying to take advantage of other individuals just based on their reaction to COVID-19. So between March 9th and March 23rd, over 300,000 coronavirus keyword related websites were created. So that Clorox LLC is an example. Banks have experienced a 238% increase in cyber attacks. So next, we're going to get into some of those statistics specifically from a healthcare perspective. So healthcare related cyber attacks, hospitals account for 30% of all large data breaches. It's a good target, and they have a lot of key data, as I'm sure you all know, between HIPAA and all the other personal data that is maintained. It's extremely lucrative for cyber criminals to exploit healthcare facilities. Over 2,100 healthcare data breaches have been reported in the US since 2009, and that's definitely not going to go down. Experts estimate that within 1 year, 75% of the breaches, or 75.6% chance that a breach will impact at least 5 million records. And within 3 years, almost a 26% chance, or over a 1/4% chance, that a breach will occur similar to the Anthem breach of over 80 million records. Only 68% of data breaches go unreported, and this is a key statistic here. The average cost of an actual record, just one singular record that is exploited, is $408. So we'll go into some additional statistics and information, but just to kind of point how important or how costly it is for healthcare organizations. In fact, healthcare as an industry has the highest cost per record of any other industry, with financial services being quite a bit further below, almost half of what it costs for healthcare. So negligent breaches happen twice as often as malicious ones. So this would be individuals not really paying attention, and a breach occurs as a result of that. Now, one quick example that I'll get into is Boeing. They had a breach that occurred simply as a result of an employee reaching out to her significant other, just asking if he could help format a spreadsheet. And she happened to work in the HR department. She had sent all the HR records, and in turn, it resulted in 36,000 employee information being breached. So it just shows how important it is that individuals need to really pay attention to what they're doing and be careful with that information that they're working with. If you want to go on to the next slide here. Some additional facts. Healthcare industry invests less than 6% of its budget to cybersecurity. So while I was surprised by the stat that 75% feel that they have the resources in place, well, on average, the industry is only putting 6% of its budget to cybersecurity. Meanwhile, the federal government averages over 16% to its budget. And this number is actually skewed a bit because it also includes those organizations that are providing a service. So obviously they invest quite a bit more in cybersecurity than other healthcare organizations. So around 50% of healthcare organizations and their business associates have not increased their cybersecurity budgets in the last year. In fact, 10% are even lowering their budget on cybersecurity, even though the statistics are going up, and it creates more of an opportunity. So the Tenable Network Security gave the healthcare industry a grade of 54%. So obviously a grade that is a bit lower than what it should. And 88% of healthcare workers open phishing emails. So again, just emphasizing the point that employees are an extreme weak point. A couple metrics here. One is just showing that the number of healthcare breaches that have occurred over the past several years. So you can see a drastic rise in it with 510 occurring just in 2019 alone. Let's move on to the next slide. And this is just showing the statistics of how many individual records are being breached. So 2015 was a major anomaly. This is the Anthem breach. So over 80 million records were stolen in that one breach alone. But if you look at 2019 with 40 million records being stolen, that equates to over $16 billion cost, going by that $408 per record. So that's quite significant. So let's move on. I think we have another polling question coming up.
Yep, moving on to our third polling question. Our second, sorry. What are the biggest challenges to your organization? Technology refreshes, security, compliance, or all of the above?
So information is quickly coming in.
About 15 more seconds.
All right, I think this is a good stopping point here.
Okay, and here are the results.
All right, so it looks like the biggest challenges to your organization, we have 3% that are saying technology refreshes. We have 28% saying security is the biggest challenge, 9%, which I would definitely say that's definitely a key aspect within the healthcare industry, and then 59% are saying all of the above. So pretty similar to other statistics that we've seen. Andrea, if you want to go into the cybersecurity countermeasures.
Absolutely. So here we're going to discuss some cybersecurity countermeasures that you can apply both in your house and your business. So securing your workstations, just locking down your systems when you're off, when you stop working, or when you're getting up to go somewhere else and leave your equipment unattended, just lock it down. If you have computers that you leave overnight in your environment that do not need to be left on, just shut them down. Running up-to-date virus scanning software, both during the day and after, is something that needs to be applied more often. A lot of the times we notice that policies are set only for after hours, but they're not protecting the environment during, and sometimes these different antivirus only work based on the different signatures that are provided to them. You can password protect files, definitely keeping your software up to date. Just because you have a workstation that is running a Windows 10 computer doesn't mean that it's protected. Windows 10 has different flavors. They have 1703, 1809, 1903, 1909, and 1703 is actually going to be obsolete very soon. Physical security. Controlling access to your sensitive areas, to your servers. A lot of the times when we're doing assessments, we go in and then it's like an open gateway for everybody to just go through and grab a cup of coffee. They should be locked down. Nobody besides the IT manager and maybe another individual should have access. The reason is anybody can just walk in and plug in a USB device and start siphoning out data. Install cable locks. Again, limit the amount of people who has access and make sure that your sensitive documents are secure. Perform audits. Evaluate internal and external controls. Use third-party vendors for non-biased reporting. And this is just to make sure that your IT department is doing what they're supposed to be doing, what they say they're doing. Ensure that the configuration on the firewalls, on the routers, on domain controllers are properly applied. Backups. Backups, this is crucial. Backing up your data. 75% of your backups data shows will fail when you try to do a restoration. So testing your backups regularly and making sure that you have different copies, both offsite, on-site, or having a hybrid model, meaning on-site and in the cloud. It's definitely a recommendation that we provide to you. And of course, restrict the access on who can perform restoration. So you don't want anybody from your IT department to be able to just do a restore, or let's say of a C-level executive or somebody from HR department. Controlling access to data. Only allow access that is absolutely required. If people do not need the access, do not give it to them, only if it's actually required. Don't grant accounts because access may be required. Use the least privileges access policies that state access will only be granted if required, not by default. Are your accounts removed and passwords change when someone changes jobs or is terminated? A lot of the times what we see is that we go in and the domain controllers, when we're on it, it has a lot of people that have left the environment, but their accounts are still active. Incident response plan. If you don't have that, if you don't have one, or if you do have one, have it reviewed and make sure it is somebody by a security expert. Something that we notice on the healthcare industry is that a lot of law firms, a lot of lawyers are wanting to jump in and tell organizations how to handle an incident. That's why you always have your counsel and the security expert to guide you in what is the most appropriate way. Definitely having counsel involved to maintain legal privilege is imperative. Telemedicine. For those of you who are using Zoom, for example, I'm sure a lot, you've seen in the news how Zoom bombing has occurred. A lot of people have been jumping on into different streams for business conversations, showing inappropriate content or displaying inappropriate content. Definitely, you need to make sure that you have the appropriate policies and procedures in place. Some of the ways that you can counter that if you're using Zoom is, just create virtual waiting rooms and make sure that the people that you are accepting are actually people that you invited. Using unique meeting IDs and passwords. If the individual you send the link to doesn't have the ID and password, then other people, if that account is hacked, then they won't be able to access the account. And of course, locking down your meeting after the individuals have joined is imperative. Working from home. If you have individuals in your organization that are working from home during COVID-19, which is mostly a lot of us, you make sure that your IT department is setting up VPN or virtual private networks. What a VPN does is that it encrypts the transit of data from point A to point B, so your data is protected. Of course, use 2FA or MFA. Difference between the two is exactly that. 2FA, you use two pieces to authenticate, and MFA, you may have multiple, 3, 4. Like, for example, having an app plus a hardware key like a Ubico key. Other countermeasures, I talked in length about in-house CFI security. Definitely, we've seen that a lot of hospitals are doing this. In the sense, if you go on Glassdoor, for example, you see other hospitals that are hiring in order to build their CFI capabilities because they're starting to see that having in-house CFI capabilities lowers the amount of people who are leaving and encourages the employees, the people who are taking care of the organization, to stay and grow internally. Of course, understanding your cybersecurity policy. What is it really covering? And under what terms and conditions? I talked about insurers. Insurers do not like to pay out claims. They will find they are out to make sure that the payouts that they will have to provide to you and your business after an impact are minimized. The cloud. If you have, for example, Microsoft, what type of licensing do you have your users under? Sometimes we go in and they only have the most basic one, but Microsoft has a lot of security features under Microsoft O365 or O365 license E3 or 5 that you can apply, and you can apply certain policies such as, prevent anybody from your organizations from logging on abroad, like China, Russia. It will automatically block it. Data loss prevention solutions is definitely a must for the healthcare industry. Protecting your devices, ensuring that data is not leaving the environment in physical devices is imperative. FIM solutions, tracking changes on your files. If somebody made a change, who made the change? Was it approved? Were they tampering with the file itself? And threat and intel. And threat and intel is something I really want to touch on because it's something that we offer a lot here with Cyber. And it's basically OSINT. It's open or available information out there. If for those of you who are interested, if you email me and give me the domain, or you're interested in running a threat and intel report in your organization, just email us. We'll provide you with some really cool info that we find just openly available. Sometimes what we do is that we go and scrape dark web databases to see whether email accounts or domains have been hacked, and where the data has been going, whether it's for social media or was it used to steal somebody's identity, etc. This is extremely important and definitely recommended for you guys. So I think we have a third question coming up, a polling question.
Yep, we're on to our third polling question, and we want to be mindful of everyone's time. We do recognize we have about 5 minutes left, so we'll leave this up for about 30 seconds and then try to get through the rest of the presentation. And you do all have it as a handout as well to reference after the fact. All right, about 10 more seconds.
Looks like we're at 85%, only a couple more seconds.
Okay.
90%.
Close it out.
95. All right, let's close it out.
All right. And here are the results.
So employees, a number of organizations, the largest percent feel it is the highest percent risk, and that's actually accurate. So I'm surprised actually it's not a higher risk, because employees is the one thing that you probably have the least amount of control over. Although security awareness training is a big thing, which we'll go into just a little bit, knowing that we only have a couple more minutes here. So we're going to just expedite some slides. So let's go into, so we'll be going through social engineering. And primarily, we're just going to go through phishing. Security awareness training is one of the most important things you can do for employees. There's multiple types of phishing. Could be through emails, through websites, through phone calls. So the key is that employees are trained and they're well versed in understanding the types of phishing attacks. Phishing can be very easily done. In fact, there's a lot of tools out there for free that's available to cyber criminals to help them with this, whether it be to spoof a phone number, or to set up a website maliciously, or even templates to support phishing emails or spear phishing, which is a targeted attack. So the way phishing occurs, you receive an email asking you to update your account. You enter your username and password into a fake page, or it could make you click on a link. And ultimately, that's going to allow the attacker to collect your information, or create a portal to allow them to access information at your organization or at home. So ideally, you're going to limit the exposure that you may have from that, one, by having different mechanisms in place. So let's actually skip down. If we can skip a couple slides, let's go just to slide 41, so you can keep going down. Another couple right here. So phishing do's, review the email for grammar and spelling. A lot of times these are coming from uneducated individuals from a standpoint of understanding the English language. So keep an eye out for that. Confirm the sender. So make sure it is from a legitimate sender, someone you're expecting it from. Inspect the links. So you could receive something from LinkedIn, but instead of LinkedIn, there's actually one instead of the L. So watch out for that. Validate the request. So don't just reply to the email received. You can send a new email to that person who sent it to make sure it's going to the right person. And use common sense. So let's go to the next slide, which is don'ts. So don't ever trust the sender. As I said before, make sure to send an email. That way you make sure that it's coming directly from you. You know the recipient it's going to, so you don't have to respond. Don't ever click on unsolicited links. Don't ever open unsolicited attachments or respond to email directly. Don't send passwords or sensitive information. And don't be embarrassed if something happens. Make sure to talk to your IT, to let them know something happened. that needs to be remedied. The longer you wait, the longer things can happen and the more damage a cyber criminal can do. So I know we're out of time here, so let's go down to the last polling question if we can.
Okay, and here's our fourth polling question. Does your organization perform security awareness training? Yes to all employees upon hire, at least annually after. Yes to a select group of employees, or at least annually. Yes, but training is not provided annually, or no.
We already have 84% that have voted, up to 87%. So if you need CPE credits, make sure to get your vote in here.
About 5 more seconds. All right, and here are the results.
All right, great. So 92% voted, and it looks like 62% said employees are provided training upon hire and at least annually. That's good. Obviously, that it's important that that number grows because individuals need to be trained. They need to make sure they understand their responsibilities to help an organization maintain their security. Now, as I said, I know that we've gone a couple minutes past your time, but we want to thank everyone for their participation today. And if we do have some questions here for anyone who has submitted any questions, we will provide a response. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone.